Hey family, let's talk about what's happening on the streets of America. Let's talk about the protests that we see all over our country. Let's talk about it from a biblical perspective. Let's look at a historical parallel that was taking place in Egypt, the greatest nation in the world at that time. During that time, there was oppression, there was frustration. There were an Israelite nation in the midst of an Egyptian country. The fact is that these Israelites had been there for 400 years. They had made significant contribution to the Egyptian society and the Egyptian economy, yet they were not included as Egyptians. They would probably be called Israeli Egyptians. What they did had not been considered, had not been taken note of, and because of that, they were looked down at. They were, they were, they were completely ignored with regards to their rights and their privileges. So they began to cry out in the streets. The Bible says that when God spoke to Moses, he says, "These cries of anguish had reached up to my ears." Now, these people were not crying to God. They were crying out in anguish. If you read the text, it never says specifically that these people were crying out to Yahweh. They were just crying in anguish. Anguish is a language that God understands. God hears. God does not like people to be oppressed. God does not like people to be taken advantage of. And so they cried out. We have a tendency to respond to the symptoms and not the cause. The cause of this cry was that there came a Pharaoh, somebody who was more wicked than the last Pharaoh, somebody who was more vicious, who was more oppressive. And when he began to press down on the necks of the people, he created an environment in Egypt that caused the Israelites to cry out in frustration. And the Lord heard it. There comes a time when God says enough is enough. There comes a time when people can't take it anymore, when they got to cry out, when frustration is all around them and there seems to be no hope. These cries reach heaven and heaven responds. I'm here to encourage you today that heaven will respond. Man may not be able to solve the problems, but when God hears, God intercepts the plan of the enemy to oppress and sets his people free.